In football, a yo-yo team is a term used to describe clubs that frequently get promoted and relegated. BFC Southering from Berlin and Aris Limassol FC in Cyprus, for example, each went 10 consecutive seasons in which they were either promoted or relegated. Meanwhile, Rotherham United recently went 6 seasons without staying in the same division, and Norwich City bounced between the Premier League and the Championship 7 times in 9 seasons between the 2013-14 and 2021-22 seasons, cementing their status as one of English football's prime yo-yo clubs. There is no equivalent term for teams who do the opposite. That is to say, those who stay in the same division for a very long time. Bristol City, Queen's Park Rangers and Preston North End are all currently in their 10th successive seasons competing in the Championship. Shrewsbury Town are also on their 10th in a row in League One, and Newport County hold the current EFL record, now in their 12th straight season, competing in League Two. Previously, Ipswich Town spent 17 consecutive seasons in the Championship up to 2019, when they were relegated to League One, before winning back-to-back promotions to the Premier League. The closest thing that we have as a term for that is boring. Sorry, how rude of me. I didn't even think. I should clarify, to any Americans who might be watching, promotion and relegation is something that happens in some countries where there is a pyramid of interconnected leagues, and teams can move between them, either up or down, based upon their performance in any given season. I know, it sounds wild, but it is a thing that exists. This video could, of course, theoretically be about any Major League Soccer team, or any A-League, Singapore Premier League, or Papua New Guinea National Soccer League team for that matter, where they also don't have any promotion or relegation, just as it could be about many giants of the game, like Barcelona, Benfica, and Boca Juniors, who haven't been promoted or relegated, but only because they have spent all of their time in the top flight, which I hope you'll all agree is much less interesting than a team within a promotion-relegation system and outside of a top flight, which just never gets promoted or relegated. To be honest, if you don't agree with that assessment, this probably isn't the video for you. If you do, then allow me to introduce you to FC Eindhoven. Yes, that's right, there is another football club from Eindhoven, it's not just PSV, who have been in the same league now, the Eerste Divisie, the Dutch second tier, for almost 50 years. FC Eindhoven were last relegated from the Eredivisie in 1977, and they have tasted neither promotion nor relegation in the 47 years since. Eindhoven's uninterrupted stay in the Eerste Divisie predates the advent of the internet, the invention of CDs, and the IVF breakthrough in reproductive medicine. Since FC Eindhoven were last promoted or relegated, Iran had an Islamic revolution, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, got bogged down in a protracted and costly armed guerrilla conflict, and lost, only for the empire that supported the Mujahideen against the Soviets to also invade Afghanistan, get bogged down in a protracted and costly armed guerrilla conflict, and withdraw, only for the Taliban to immediately regain control. Oh, and Birmingham City have had 16 promotions or relegations, and will likely make it 17 this season, before FC Eindhoven experience a single one. Heck, FC Eindhoven have had their current league status for longer than they have had their current name. So just what on earth is going on? Who are FC Eindhoven? Why can't they get promoted or relegated? And did all of their supporters slip into a coma at some point during the 1990s due to the terminal boredom? Well, sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Eindhoven, the so-called City of Light, as we attempt to answer all of those questions regarding a club that has had shockingly few highlights or lowlights for nearly 5 decades. The Eerste Divisie, which FC Eindhoven competes in, is an unusual league. One of 2 professional football leagues in the Netherlands, alongside the top-flight Eredivisie. Currently 4 out of the league's 20 teams, so 20%, are reserve teams who aren't eligible to win promotion to the Eredivisie. That means that those teams, even if they were to win the Eerste Divisie title, as young Ajax's reserve or under-23 team did, back in the 2017-18 season, they can't go up or compete in the Eerste Divisie's promotion and relegation playoffs. The Eerste Divisie's promotion and relegation playoffs themselves are also quite unusual. Instead of the top 2 teams winning promotion automatically, assuming they're not reserve teams, and the teams who make up the playoffs being determined solely by league finish, as is the case in the Championship for example, in the Eerste Divisie, the top 2 still win automatic promotion, but the 6 Eerste Divisie teams who go into the playoffs, alongside the 1 team that finishes 16th in the Eredivisie, is determined partly by what could probably be best translated into English as something like period winners. If your mind went to anything other than periods of time, you are sick in the head. What would period winners in any other context even mean? Honestly, some of you. Just bizarre. The Eerste Divisie season is effectively split into 4 periods, a first, second, third and fourth period. Great names for them, if you ask me, does what it says on the tin. And the club with the best record in each of these 4 periods qualifies automatically for the playoffs, regardless of their final league finish. It opens up the possibility, as happened in this Reddit user, JWK91's Football Manager save, which I hope you won't mind me sharing, that a team could perform exceptionally well in just 1 quarter of the Eerste Divisie season and qualify for the playoffs, despite actually finishing bottom of the league. In actual fact, such occurrences are vanishingly rare. Teams as low as 17th, like Telstar in the 2008-09 season, have qualified for the playoffs, despite finishing 32 points behind the top-ranked playoff side and only 9 points above bottom place. But for the most part, especially in recent years, it has tended to be the teams from 3rd through to 8th who have made the playoffs, rarely granting access to anyone who finishes lower than 10th, despite it being theoretically possible and having happened in the past. That allocates 4 of the 6 playoff spots, with the other 2 issued to the 2 highest placed teams who didn't win any of the 4 periods, meaning that the Eerste Divisie teams in 3rd and 4th place are guaranteed a spot in the playoffs regardless. At the bottom end of the division, likewise, the Eerste Divisie is a little bit odd. The league below the Eerste Divisie in the Dutch Football League pyramid is the Amateur Tweede Divisie, the 2nd division in English, and relegation from the Eerste Divisie to the Tweede Divisie is basically a voluntary act, given the mandatory change of status required for teams to transition between the 2 leagues. No one has been relegated from the Eerste Divisie since Arkeles 29 from the small town of Groesbeek in the 2016-17 season, who finished bottom of the league following a points deduction, were in a state of financial chaos, and have since been relegated all the way down to the 7th tier of Dutch football. That means that for most of their time in the Eerste Divisie, FC Eindhoven have been effectively safeguarded from relegation, so long as they could avoid total economic collapse and didn't choose to vacate their professional status. FC Eindhoven were founded in 1909, 4 years before PSV Eindhoven, as EVV Eindhoven, which stood for Eindhovens Voetbalvereniging, basically the Eindhoven Football Association in English. EVV Eindhoven were initially founded as the football department of a broader sports club, but as football exploded in popularity in the Netherlands, it soon became the club's primary focus as well. In 1921, EVV merged with Herstal, which used to be a separate village outside of Eindhoven, but was incorporated by the city in 1920, becoming a borough within Eindhoven, and one which borders Stratum, which also used to be a separate village, and where FC Eindhoven are based. In the 1930s, EVV Eindhoven became a really competitive team, contesting a fierce local derby with PSV Eindhoven and winning their first trophy, the KNVB Cup, which is the Netherlands' equivalent of the FA Cup, in the 1936-37 season, beating Amsterdam-based Spartan 1-0 in the final. 2 years later, EVV won their regional championship, the First Division Region South, finishing above Maastricht, NAC Breda and their bitter rivals PSV, to qualify for the club's first national championship in the pre-Eredivisie era. In the championship playoff, EVV won 2, drew 3 and lost 3, finishing 4th, as Ajax picked up their 5th championship in just 8 years. EVV's crowning moment came during the mid-1950s though, in the 1953-54 season to be specific, in which they won the Eerste Klasse D, finishing above the likes of Feyenoord and Willem II, having only lost 3 games during the regular season, and proceeded to win 3, draw 2, and only lose 1 of their 6 games in the championship playoffs, to be crowned as the champions of Dutch football for the first time. That euphoria was made particularly sweet for EVV supporters, given that 2 of their 3 wins in the playoffs came against their cross-city rivals PSV, who they beat 2-1 and thumped 4-0 in matchups which ultimately determined which of Eindhoven's 2 powerhouses would be declared as the champions of Dutch football as a whole. Interestingly, EVV's first ever Dutch championship came in the last ever season of the amateur era in Dutch football. Immediately after that success, FC Eindhoven, as it is probably less confusing to refer to them as from this point onwards, turned professional, and they won the Eerste Klasse D title yet again, this time finishing above Ajax and VVV Venlo, among others, to make the championship playoffs again. This time, however, in the first season of the professional era, FC Eindhoven finished 4th out of 4 teams in the championship playoff, drawing both games against PSV, who finished 3rd, 1 place and 2 points above them. With the benefit of hindsight, this marked an era-defining turning point in the battle for football supremacy in the city of Eindhoven. Although PSV had only finished 3rd in the Dutch championship playoff, 1 place above FC Eindhoven, with Willem II crowned as Dutch champions for the 3rd time, it was PSV who were invited to compete in the inaugural European Champion Clubs Cup, later renamed the European Cup, and now the UEFA Champions League, in the 1955-56 season. The first 16 teams to compete in the European Champion Clubs Cup didn't earn their place through any official qualification process, but rather, they were selected by the French sports newspaper L'Équipe and sent invitations, sometimes based upon sporting merit, the likes of Real Madrid, AC Milan and Stade de Rome were the Spanish, Italian and French champions in the previous season, but sometimes for much more arbitrary reasons. Hibernian, for example, who represented Scotland after Aberdeen declined their invitation, had only finished 5th in Scotland's top flight the previous season, behind Celtic, Rangers and Hearts, but were invited on the basis that, at that time, they were the only Scottish club to have installed floodlights at their ground. PSV weren't actually the first club from the Netherlands to be invited to compete either, but in another fateful decision, which would have significant long-term ramifications, Holland Sport, from The Hague, who withdrew from the Dutch league just the following season, declined their invitation, and it was offered to PSV instead. PSV had a miserable introduction to European football, battered 6-2 on aggregate by Rapid Vienna in the first round of the European Cup. But regardless, the pendulum of football in Eindhoven and in the Netherlands more broadly had swung in their direction. The following season, the old Dutch championship system was replaced by the professional Hoofdklasse, which only had 2 leagues, and the amateur Eerste Klasse, which had 3. This was principally a means of determining which teams would compete in which league the following year, in which the Eredivisie came into force. FC Eindhoven finished 7th in the Hoofdklasse A, 3 points and 3 places above the drop zone into the Eerste Divisie, which meant that they would be inaugural members of the newly formed Eredivisie in the 1956-57 season. Rivals PSV, meanwhile, finished 4th in the Hoofdklasse B, also becoming founding members of the new Dutch top flight, though it was Rapid JC, now known as Roda, who represented the Netherlands in the European Cup this time around, again going out in the first round. In the first ever Eredivisie season, FC Eindhoven finished bottom of the league and were relegated, as rivals PSV finished 5th. At this point, it is just worth noting that, despite their early success, the odds were always stacked firmly against FC Eindhoven when it came to their battle with PSV, especially during the era of professionalism. Whereas FC Eindhoven had been founded to fulfill a need for a football club in Eindhoven to compete with the emerging powers in Randstad, PSV were founded by Philips, the electronics giant, as a club for the company's employees. It is almost impossible to overstate the importance of Philips within the context of Eindhoven as a city. The city's nickname, the City of Light, doesn't come from the fact that it is illuminated spectacularly on an evening, although it now is, but because of Philips themselves, who were founded in 1891 with their first product being light bulbs. In the early 20th century, and particularly during the 1920s and 30s, in the build-up to the professionalisation of Dutch football, Philips went from strength to strength, becoming an enormous multinational corporation. By the early 1900s, Philips was already the largest private employer in the Netherlands, and during the post-war era, it became the country's, and indeed, one of Europe's biggest and most profitable companies. The boom in Philips' profits, particularly during the 50s, 60s and 70s, coincided with an intense period of investment in PSV, overseen primarily by Philips employee and board member Ben van Gelder. PSV, therefore, rapidly professionalised and started recruiting the best players from throughout the Netherlands, not just in Eindhoven, moving on from the era of the club's players being Philips employees. It took a while for PSV to disrupt the Ajax and Feyenoord duopoly in the Eredivisie, despite their massive investment. But things finally started to click for them at the most inopportune moment for FC Eindhoven. Following their relegation in the inaugural Eredivisie campaign in 1957, the Blue-Whites not only failed to return to the top flight, they were relegated again down to the amateur Tweede Divisie in the 1968-69 campaign. They bounced back in 1971 and returned to the Eredivisie for the first time in almost 20 years in 1975, but sure enough, in the same season that FC Eindhoven finally won promotion from the Eerste Divisie, PSV had to go one better and win their first Eredivisie title in 12 years, heralding the era of the Big Three. PSV went on to win 9 out of the next 18 Eredivisie titles, winning more than Ajax and Feyenoord combined, in addition to lifting the European Cup in 1988 when they beat Real Madrid in the semis and Benfica in the final, becoming the first Dutch club to be crowned as European champions since Ajax's 3 successive titles with Cruyff in the early 70s. FC Eindhoven, meanwhile, narrowly survived in the Eredivisie in the 1975-76 season, though they lost 2-1 and 5-0 against PSV, who won their second successive title that season, and in the 1976-77 season, Eindhoven were relegated to the Eerste Divisie on goal difference, tied on points with NEC, but having scored the fewest goals and conceded the most of any team in the division. In the early years, PSV's economic might, by virtue of their financial backing by Philips, played into the narrative of the rivalry between the two. Some FC Eindhoven fans saw themselves as being the plucky, salt-of-the-earth working-class Eindhoven club, and PSV as representing a more affluent segment of the Eindhoven population and a more artificial and financially driven sporting success. This narrative wasn't necessarily reflected in the makeup of PSV supporters, which cast a wide net, particularly following the club's success, but it created a perceived class grievance which, always adds an extra level of spice to a derby. As the years have gone by, PSV's success and FC Eindhoven's struggles have greatly diminished the relevance and strength of feeling which surrounds the Lichtstad derby. Literally, the Light City derby, or the Eindhoven derby, as it's sometimes also known. The two teams haven't met in the league since that 1976-77 season, over 47 years ago, and their last competitive meeting of any description, and their only one since then, in the quarter-finals of the KNVB Cup, came in the 1998-99 season, over 25 years ago, where PSV ruthlessly exposed the gulfing class between the two sides, thrashing the Blue-Whites 5-0, with Ruud van Nistelrooy among their goalscorers. Interestingly, given the contrasting fortunes of the two clubs over the last 50 years, FC Eindhoven actually have the superior record when it comes to head-to-head encounters, with 30 victories to PSV's 25, reflecting just how competitive they truly were during the first half of the 20th century. Unfortunately, FC Eindhoven are now more used to playing against PSV's reserve team, divisional rivals Young PSV, who actually have a better head-to-head record versus FC Eindhoven than PSV's first team, with 13 victories to Eindhoven's 7 in their 23 encounters. Consequently, the Lichtstad derby has become a very one-sided rivalry in recent decades, with most PSV fans wishing FC Eindhoven well by virtue of them posing no legitimate threat or serious competition to them whatsoever, and even among FC Eindhoven supporters, there is a big split, partly generational, between those who still view PSV as the old enemy and resent their dominance within the city, and those who view them with relative ambivalence and are more interested in rivalries with fellow North Brabant clubs like Helmond Sport, who FC Eindhoven actually play against on a regular basis. In recent years, reflecting the diminished animosity between the two, PSV and FC Eindhoven have actually formed a strategic partnership, which has seen players join FC Eindhoven from PSV, the two clubs share facilities, and Young PSV use FC Eindhoven's Jan Lauvers Stadion as a backup stadium when their own ground is unavailable. The late Jan Lauvers, who FC Eindhoven Stadium is named after, played for both FC Eindhoven and PSV before becoming a multi-millionaire businessman after he retired from football. During the 1970s, the last time FC Eindhoven were in the Eredivisie, the terraces at the Jan Lauvers Stadium were capable of packing in almost 20,000 spectators. These days, following a series of renovations and the implementation of modern safety regulations, the stadium's capacity has been reduced to about 4,500. Though it remains a charming little ground with decent facilities, which is plenty big enough for FC Eindhoven at this moment in time. Eindhoven average about 3,000 fans at their home games, which is roughly half the Eerste Divisie average, although that average fluctuates wildly based upon the size of the clubs that drop out of the Eredivisie each season. Without a massive fan base, or any enormously wealthy benefactors, FC Eindhoven have always had to compete with a modest budget, heavily reliant upon their academy, youth team, and player development. That's made more difficult by virtue of PSV, one of the largest and best-run academies on the planet, sitting right on their doorstep, and hoovering up almost all of the best local talent at a very young age, although it does allow FC Eindhoven to pick up the scraps discarded by PSV's youth ranks, who are unable to get moves to other top-flight clubs. FC Eindhoven have resisted becoming an outright feeder club to PSV, despite their strategic partnership. PSV have young PSV for that purpose regardless, but inevitably, like Boa Vista in Portugal, Espanyol in Barcelona, or 1860 in Munich, they can never fully escape the shadow of their giant neighbours. It is fitting that one of the clubs FC Eindhoven supporters have a fan relationship with is Tranmere Rovers, who, like FC Eindhoven, are a proud and historic club who play in blue and white, but live in the long shadow cast by their two giant Merseyside neighbours, Liverpool and Everton. Given the financial headwinds and their dominant neighbours, it shouldn't come as an enormous surprise that FC Eindhoven haven't been sensationally successful in recent years. Even with that in mind, though, 47 years.
So, let's not take the piss here.
I certainly wasn't.
Well, I think you are.
During that time, FC Eindhoven have qualified for the Eerste Divisie playoffs in the 1990-91 season, the 1991-92 season, 1997-98, 2009-10, 2011-12, when they finished third, 2013-14, 2014-15, which was the club's highest league finish since their 1977 relegation, as they finished second and were second-tier runners-up behind NEC, 2015-16, 2016-17, 2021-22, when they finished third again, and in the 2022-23 season, so just the season before last, when Eindhoven snuck into the playoffs, but lost in extra time against Almere City in the first round, who went on to defeat VVV Venlo and Emmen to win promotion to the Eredivisie. That is 10 different occasions over the last 47 years, and in actual fact, all of them within the last 32 years, that FC Eindhoven have made the playoffs, and not only have they failed to win promotion on a single occasion, they've never even made a playoff final. It is a pretty remarkable record when you really think about it. And Leeds fans think that they're cursed in the playoffs. FC Eindhoven also finished bottom of the Eerste Divisie once in the 1984-85 season, in which they were absolutely abysmal, but declined the option to revoke their professional status, and they sort of finished bottom again in the league for a second time in the 2012-13 season, just 1 year after finishing third, but Veendam and AGOVV were both expelled from the league and docked all of their points midway through the season, so they technically finished below them. Eindhoven also have a remarkable number of second-from-bottom finishes in the Eerste Divisie, which, if there were a more fluid exchange of teams between the Eerste Divisie and the Tweede Divisie, would have resulted in relegation. This season started in promising fashion for FC Eindhoven, who led the Eerste Divisie table after the first 3 games, which they won 4-0, 2-0 and 3-0, but failure to win any of their subsequent 4 games, including a 3-0 defeat against Young PSV, currently leaves them 5th, 1 place behind Young PSV, in an incredibly congested Eerste Divisie table. They face Roda at home this evening. Could this finally be the season that FC Eindhoven win promotion? No, Obviously not. They will remain in the Eerste Divisie until a nuclear apocalypse, climate catastrophe, supervolcano eruption, or large asteroid collides with the Earth, causing a global extinction event. In fact, the only things that will survive the apocalypse are cockroaches and FC Eindhoven's uninterrupted Eerste Divisie status. They'll just keep on playing in the Dutch second tier all on their own, still somehow unable to win promotion or get relegated. In all seriousness, there is something charming about clubs like FC Eindhoven, who exist free from any pretenses of grandeur, most of the worst excesses of commercialisation in football, and solely as a community club with a small but friendly and incredibly devoted fan base who stick by their club no matter what. And what, in most cases, is absolutely nothing. Just an endless stream of nothingness. Yet they keep on coming back. If you're ever in the great city of Eindhoven and want an alternative to watching PSV, you can go and watch FC Eindhoven, and the team that never gets promoted or relegated, for a welcoming and authentic Dutch football experience for less than €20. This isn't an advert. I haven't been paid by FC Eindhoven. They would probably have asked me not to call the last half century of their history an endless stream of nothingness, or compare them to cockroaches if I had. I'm just letting you know that it is something that you can do, and something that the kind of weirdos who like me would probably enjoy. Yeah, that's right. I'm looking at you. Specifically you. Anyway, that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, yet this is probably about the 1,000th time that I have said it, you can subscribe not just to this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potshammer, where the fourth video of me visiting the German city with the lowest GDP per capita is about to be uploaded. Both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.